So thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Claudia Coussins and I'm the Deputy Head of the Early Years and Prevention Department here at Anna Freud. I'd also like to welcome and thank Paul and Rob, who are amazing BSL interpreters. They'll be with us for the duration of this webinar, and there will be a pop-up window on your screen that you can adjust and move around. So today's webinar on wellbeing is part of our Early Years in Mind network, where we collaborate with practitioners, families, and policymakers involved in the early years. We produce content that you and our wider network have told us is important to you so that families can be supported in the best way. The wellbeing of early years practitioners is consistently one of the themes that we're asked to create resources on. And specifically, the timing is relevant too. January can be a time when people are often reflecting on and considering their well-being more in the context of the new year and seasonal changes. So alongside this webinar today, we're also delighted to publish our most recent resource, which is a workbook for early years practitioners, which situates well-being in an ecological framework. You should be able to see that in the chat now. And although we've created other wellbeing resources, in this one, we wanted to explicitly recognise that mental health and wellbeing exist in a wider context. And although as individuals, there's lots that we can do to look after ourselves, we also think it's essential to look at the wider structures or ecology of the early years and the context that we're working in. There's also a celebratory aspect to this webinar. The value and the impact that early years practitioners have on children and families is so huge, and we want to recognise that, while also acknowledging the toll it can take and that it can sometimes be under-recognised, under-resourced, whether that's through pay or through regulations that don't fully recognise the needs on the ground. So to help us unpack and explore this complex topic, I'm excited to welcome our panel, who bring with them so much insight. Each panelist will give us a presentation on different aspects of wellbeing in the early years. From academic, practitioner, and parent perspectives, our panel will explore the philosophy and politics of wellbeing all the way through to practical tips for looking after yourselves. We'll hear from Dr. Valerie Daniel, Executive Head Teacher of Washwood Health Nursery School and Bordesley Green East Nursery School. Wanying Zhou, researcher at the Wellbeing Research Centre at the University of Oxford. Shaddai Tembo, lecturer, speaker and writer in early childhood studies, and Crossan, the parent participation advisor at the Anna Freud. We'll have time for discussion and Q&A at the end, so please do put any questions in the chat and we'll try and incorporate those in the discussion at the end. So I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Valerie Daniel.
I think people who lead staff and work with children and families have a sense that they're responsible for everything these days, even things they really have no control over, and it can be daunting. For some reason, we live in a culture that encourages us to separate the personal from the professional, especially in professions that deal with children and families. Professional boundaries is indeed very important, and ultimate responsibility for well-being is a personal responsibility. But can we truly have a duty of care for others if we don't have a duty of care for ourselves? Can a duty of care for ourselves exist meaningfully outside of a supportive culture that prioritizes well-being? No matter how we professionalize our careers, working with children and families is an emotional minefield, just as the daily ups and downs of our individual personal lives is also an emotional minefield. Any of us can be affected by any number of things in our personal lives: bereavement, breakups, an argument, drama with our children, the in-laws, our health, the state of the world around us. Personal well-being is complex, and professional well-being will only be a paper-thin veneer without personal well-being. Well-being is contagious. Our emotions are impacted by our well-being. If emotions are positive, we notice opportunities to solve problems. We value what we have around us. We appreciate the people around us, and we have an overall sense of well-being. If emotions are negative, we tend to focus on our challenges in a negative way, and we exist with this pervading sense of foreboding and disheartenment. We have to understand that emotions are energy. Emotional energy of itself is neutral. I describe it as a wave of sensation. Or physiological reaction is what makes emotional energy either positive or negative. Energy is fluid, it is felt and released into our environments. This phenomenon is called social cohesion. Humans are hardwired to tune into and align with the feelings of the people they're with as a way of building relationships. Emotions act as social signs that influence others. I remember reading somewhere that the emotional brain is connected to every area of our brain, but the analytical or the logical brain is not. In regards to neuroscience, our emotional brains literally controls how our brains work. Yet we promote this idea that professionally we should either suppress or ignore our personal sense of well-being. How many times have you heard, leave it at the door? Keep your personal drama to yourself. Is that really realistic? Of course, we can't sit parents down and go into details of our personal lives, but a workplace culture that creates the space to acknowledge personal issues is hugely beneficial for all. The truth is, how we understand, manage, and effectively utilize our emotional energy is pivotal to both personal and collective well-being in our workplaces. How we nurture a culture of well-being needs guidelines and agreed criteria to be effective. Sorry. We have to look at the interplay between staff and children's well-being. It is normal for children to have big emotions. Children have a growing sense of, for regulating their emotions. All of us who work with children know how emotionally draining it is to deal with young children's big feelings. For those of us who work in early years environments, think back to September and settling in children. If staff do not have good reserves of personal well-being, this can become a traumatic experience for children, staff, and parents. Addressing the emotional needs of children is crucial for their physical and mental well-being. This is not a casual outcome for caregivers, such as parents, teachers, health visitors, and social workers. We are literally responsible for nurturing physically and mentally healthy children, for them to grow into physically and mentally healthy adults. What we do has lifelong repercussions in many cases. Good staff well-being is essential for cultivating a mentally healthy learning and working environment, for retaining and motivating staff, and ultimately for the well-being of children. Well-being is about our holistic health, which includes our physical and emotional health. When we have good levels of well-being, we have a sense of being in balance, which helps us to be able to generally cope well. We feel engaged and motivated. We're able to be resilient, which supports us being able to deal effectively with daily troubles and also bounce back from life's challenges. As leaders, some of us tend to wear our poor work-life balance like a badge of honor. Look at me, I'm working at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm guilty of that as well. I'm not wearing it as a badge, but I'm guilty of working at very strange hours. We need to stop this. It sends the wrong message. We need dedicated staff who will be there when we need them, not burnt out staff who are struggling to cope. We need to take some of the pressure off. We can do this by creating safe spaces for staff to talk about what really affects them. a space that is free of judgment to deeply connect with social issues, a safe space by making time to do supervision with our staff so that personal issues can be aired. We're not providing solutions, but giving staff an opportunity to offload. The stuff we carry around can be really heavy and it can weigh us down. So that opportunity to offload sometimes, even though it may just be a listening ear, is often very welcomed. Leaders can also invest in coaching and mentoring for themselves and for staff. This is about growing and nurturing a culture of well-being in our schools, settings, and working environments. So this is a questionnaire to support discussions around well-being for leaders. Is the workplace a positive environment for all staff? And if you notice, all is highlighted because it could be a positive environment for some and not for others. And are we aware of why it may not be for others? Do all staff have the same opportunities to grow into leaders in their environment, to be promoted within their environment? Are we looking at the context of how staff are supported in doing their roles and how this in turn helps our environment to thrive? Is our environment appealing and looked after? Honestly, if it's broken down and horrible, it's not a nice place to come into. Are there low-cost ways to promote well-being and make staff feel valued? Things like acknowledging when they've done good work, just having a bowl of fruit, bringing in treats just to thank staff on an inset day, for example. Little things go a really long way. Do the senior leaders in the school model good working practices and self-care to encourage an appropriate work-life balance? Are we encouraging staff to take breaks? Or are we trying to eke every single ounce out of them? For example, are we, when it's time to finish on time sometimes, are we saying, come on, guys, everybody, you need to go home? Are we having regular debriefs and supervision and peer observations, anything that would help with dealing with difficult situations? Is there a culture of clear communication about workplace well-being? Are we sure that everyone knows that that is a priority? Or is it just a tick box exercise? Do staff really feel able to talk about concerns? Do staff members, the senior staff, have an open door policy, which we then close because some of this stuff is private? But do staff know they can come in and discuss anything with you and that it will be confidential, unless, of course, it is something that needs to be reported for safeguarding reasons or whatever those are. But that kind of criteria needs to be agreed and crystal clear before these discussions happen. How are staff consulted about change and involved in developing problem-solving strategies? Do we do unto them, or are they a part of creating the solutions to the issues that we may have in our working environments? I tend to do a regular staff well-being survey and create a proper feedback which goes to staff, and then we can sit and discuss these things, which we tend to do. Does the school communication style help engage staff and build good staff relationships? In other words, are we a part of the problem if we have toxic working environments? Because leaving it does not help to solve it, but also being so ensconced in it that you become a part of the problem is not helpful. So we need to have clear understanding of where we stand when it comes to working with staff. Do we have a champion for mental health and well-being? So, this is just my little bit about why well-being is really important, because if we invest in our staff, we will get the best for our children. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks so much, Valerie. And we'll have time to come back to some of your really interesting points at the end. And I particularly liked hearing your reflections on boundaries and how there's an opportunity to nurture emotions and not neglect them, but still maintain boundaries as well. So now we're going to move on to Wanying Zhou's presentation.
Thanks, Claudia. Could everyone see my slides?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. It is my pleasure to be here and able to engage in this conversation about workforce well-being. Okay, following Valerie's presentations, I will contribute the conversation from sharing insights on how researchers understand and measure well-being in the research field. As I'm not an expert in the early year sectors, like the rest of speakers on the panel, I took this opportunity to dive into the well-being situation for early year practitioners. These are findings from a UK online survey conducted in 2018 before COVID with over 2,000 participants. The result painted a stark and concerning picture. 74% of respondents have been regularly stressed as a result of their job over the past month. 62% of them don't believe that they have a work-life balance. What's even concerning is that only 1 of 2 early year workers has spoken their stress and mental health in workplace. Thus, I want to pause and emphasize here, if you find yourself resonating with these experiences, such as high-level stress, burnout, I want to assure you that you're not alone, and it is absolutely okay to discuss your challenges and emotions at work. Unluckily, these challenges are not unique in the early year sector. Similar situation has been found across countries and school levels. If we look at this situation a little bit more internationally, Gallup study conducted in United States find that 44% of K-12 workers reporting always or very often feel burned out at work. More specifically, among K-12 employees, teachers have shown that the highest burnout rate, which is 52%. These stats may explain why well-being is now a concept at the core of many policy agendas and practice. But what do we mean when we talk about well-being? In the realm of popular culture, well-being is also increasingly becoming a focal point in mainstream conversations. When we encounter well-being on social media, it is often associated with topics such as meditation, yoga, resilience, wellness, self-care, happiness. Similarly, in the research, well-being is also used interchangeably with different concepts, like happiness, mental health, emotional well-being, subjective well-being, psychological well-being, life satisfaction, flourishing, and the list goes on. It means that if you see well-being in a research title or heading, give it a second glance, because if you read their method section, they might be measuring different things or different concepts. Thus, you can see there is lack of consensus in the literature as to what exactly well-being is, and there are lots of different theories and models of well-being. Human being has been curious about well-being for ages, and what makes up the good life has been discussed in different cultures and different traditions for thousands of years. So it is not surprising that people have different opinions on what this really means and what this includes. However, I wanted to point out in research, it is important to note that the term well-being and its related studies often carry a westernized flavor, and it's primarily conducted in English. Okay, with knowing all these informations, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of well-being research. Despite all different models, theories, and definitions, if we look at well-being research, the majority of research could be categorized into two traditions, their hedonic and eudaimonic approach. Hedonic well-being focuses on experience, desire fulfillment, pleasure seeking, the presence of positive affect, and the absence of the negative affect. It makes sense that researchers in this realm measures life satisfaction, positive and negative emotion. It cares about how you feel about your life, and they believe you're the one to evaluate. But on the other hand, eudaimonic well-being focuses on the actualization of human potential. It is more virtual related. Researchers care about whether or not your life are worthwhile. Commonly used measurements are psychological well-being, eudaimonic well-being. Most importantly, experts in this realm usually define what constitutes eudaimonic well-being and measure how you are doing in each aspect. In the later slides, I will present two different measurements under each well-being tradition. The purpose for this is not to assign a well-being score or rank your well-being among the audience, but rather to provide you with an opportunity to see how these different items measured in research resonating with your own understanding of well-being or not. For hedonic well-being, we have satisfaction with life. It's developed by Dina in 1985. It contains 5 items. This is one of the most commonly used measurements for life satisfaction. This scale asks respondents to answer how much they agree on each of following statements. First, in most of ways, my life is close to my ideal. Second, the conditions of my life are excellent. Third, I'm satisfied with my life. Fourth, so far, I've gotten the important things I want in life. Fifth, I could live my life over, I would change almost nothing. If we look at the fourth item, so far, I've gotten the important things I want in life. You can see that researchers don't really care about what the important things are. They simply ask you if you think you have achieved what you want or have gotten what you want. But if we look at the next measurement, psychological well-being, it's created by Reeve in 1989. It has 2 versions. One contains 18 items and the other contains 42. This is also one of the most commonly used eudaimonic well-being measurement. Since you can see it is more virtual related, it includes dimensions like autonomy, environmental mastery, personal growth, positive relation with others, purpose in life, and self-acceptance. These are important things researchers believe constitute eudaimonic well-being, and they want to know how you are doing on those important things. Again, if we look at the fourth item, positive relation with others, an example item is people would describe me as a giving person willing to share my time with others. This is the way researchers measuring how you are doing in terms of positive relation, in another word, kindness. In fact, psychological well-being measurement is just one way of measuring eudaimonic well-being. Different researchers include different dimensions in their theories and models based on their own understanding. Some other elements that you can find in research are engagement, clear thinking, resilience, self-esteem, and vitality. Thus, there's no way that contemporary researchers could give a perfect definition or conceptualization for everyone. But in order to make the study results comparable and make researchers able to communicate with each other on the same page, now researchers have reached on a broader agreement on 3 main conceptions of well-being. They are life satisfaction, positive emotion and negative emotion, and eudaimonic. And all these conceptions have been introduced in the previous slides. In the last of couple slides, I'd like to move how well-being is measured in major national or international survey. Taking an example from the Office for National Statistics here in the UK, 3 previously mentioned consumptions of well-being are measured. You can see life satisfaction is measured. Positive emotion is measured by happiness. Negative emotion is measured by anxiety. And eudaimonic well-being is measured by the item, to what extent do you feel that the things that you do in your life are worthwhile? This way of measuring well-being actually can be transferred to the workplace well-being. This is a measurement developed by our center and measured in some big international survey. Aligned with the previous slides, happiness is measured here. Stress, as one of the most commonly seen negative emotion in workplace, is measured. Purpose is measured as eudaimonic well-being. And satisfaction is measured within the workplace. The item you can see is, I feel completely satisfied with my work. Single question is used to ask different conceptions of well-being. And the reason for that is that for large-scale data collection, the questionnaire is usually designed to be short, easy to implement, and understandable across different cultures and language. Okay, here are some takeaways for this presentation. One message that I want to convey is mainstreams may feature different well-being research. Be aware that they may mean different things for different purposes. Second, well-being is a complicated concept, but there is a broader agreement on the consumptions in research. Their life satisfaction, positive and negative emotion, and eudaimonic. Finally, I just want to mention that if you're curious about know more of well-being research in childhood and adolescence, I'd recommend checking out the People Report that we crafted for International Baccalaureate. It's all free and available to download online. And this year we will have 4 more reports to be released in April. There's a long one about school teacher well-being and 3 mini intervention reports focusing on teacher well-being intervention, whole school approach, and physical activity. So if you're interested, please keep an eye on this. Since this is a fairly short presentation on well-being research, I hope I was able to cover some interesting ground of well-being research for later discussion, and able to improve a mutual understanding between researchers and practitioners. I'm also keen to know how practitioners in early year sectors understand well-being. This comes to the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening. I will pass the floor back to Claudia.
Thanks so much, Wanying. And yeah, you did a really amazing job of bringing together the research and the practice. And if anyone in the audience does have any comments or questions for Wanying in the discussion later on, please do put them in the chat. And now we'll move on to Shaddai. Welcome, Shaddai.
Thank you, Claudia. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, a big thanks for inviting me along to speak on this panel today. It's a real pleasure to be amongst some really esteemed colleagues talking about workforce wellbeing. It does feel like a really important month to be talking about this issue, particularly in January, where we've got the miserable weather. Most of us are returning back to work after some weeks off, and we're probably all skint after the festive break. So yeah, it feels really timely to be talking about workforce wellbeing in the early years. I'll just briefly introduce myself. So my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo. I am a lecturer at Bath Spa University and an associate lecturer at the Open University. I teach on their early childhood studies degrees there at undergraduate level. I am a former early years practitioner myself, so that's really the background I'm coming from in this presentation. I'm going to speak about 3 things then in the 10 or so minutes I've got. And some of these things I'm going to talk about have been touched on already by Wanying and Valerie, so that's really good that there's some similarity in our approach towards wellbeing. I'm going to firstly talk about wellbeing in that broader political context, really try to situate wellbeing in relation to broader societal issues. I'll then, in the middle part, think about the solution and what we can do to enhance workforce wellbeing as a whole. And the way in which I'll do that is by talking about dimensions of change, and there's different levels or scales at which we as educators can affect change towards greater well-being for the workforce as a whole. I'll start by just offering my perspective and the position in which I'm coming from, which is very much rooted in critical social justice and feminist approaches. For me, well-being is an equalities issue, and it's really important that we keep that in mind when we think about who has access to greater well-being and how we can all have a better sense of who we are and who we want to be within our roles. Just thinking about this presentation and looking at the existing research and reflecting on self-help culture, which is a really fundamental part of well-being. Of course, self-help culture is not new. Since we've been alive as humans, we've always wanted to improve ourselves. But I would say certainly in our now digital era, with the rise of influencer culture, we see lots and lots of calls to self-help and self-enhancement. Very common to these self-help ideas to improving our individual well-being is the idea that regardless of our gender, class, race, or any other abilities, anyone can achieve and anyone can be who they want to be. I often find that what accompanies these kind of self-help cultural ideas is feelings of perfectionism, wanting to be our best self, but ultimately feelings of shame and disappointment when we don't reach that. Self-help culture in many ways is a form of cruel optimism, and that's a term that we have in the literature to describe a relationship to something that we desire that can actually be an obstacle to our flourishing. So I think that self-help approaches are important, but certainly more individualistic approaches can mask those wider socio-political influences. Actually, what a lot of the research says that in current wellbeing discussion and practice, far too little attention has been devoted to theorizing about how socio-political conditions determine the quality of life. For me, I'm really influenced by Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which some of you may have come across if studying child development. The way I was taught it and the way I still teach it today is like an onion, where you peel away those layers to have the child at the center. But outside of the child, it's really important to remember that relational sense in which they're connected to families, practitioners, and then practitioners themselves are influenced by the wider community, but also society, politics, and the cultural norms and values that we have within any given society. When we're thinking about the politics of well-being in the earliest profession specifically, I think there are a number of issues at play that we need to bear in mind. Certainly what the research has shown over the past 10 to 15 years or so is an increasingly neoliberalized earliest profession. What I mean by that is the sense in which play, the fundamental importance of play, is becoming even more contested in early years environments, where educators are being forced to focus on school readiness, literacy and numeracy metrics at the expense of play. That can result in a real tension for educators trying to support children against the broader standards and impositions that they're facing. In political discourse, of course, we're now in an election year. What we're seeing is that childcare or early years education is discussed, but that's primarily in relation to childcare for parents at the expense of the quality of care for the workforce. Of course, childcare for parents and access to funding and nursery places is incredibly important. But I think what's missing from that debate is conversations about the quality of care given by early years workforce and their status as a whole. In fact, what we've seen in recent years is some damning reports showing that the Department for Education have been knowingly underfunding provision for providers. The implications for educators are pretty clear, where nurseries are having to be shut down and educators are having to find alternative career paths. It's really important to bear in mind, my last point here, that in 2020, the average wage in the early years workforce was £7.42 an hour. So the majority of the earliest profession are on minimum wage or close to that. I think for me, that's really important to bear in mind when we're thinking about who we're talking to when we think about workforce wellbeing. All of these things really closely relate to my own experience. As I said at the start, I was a former early years practitioner. You can see me on the right-hand side there reading Shark in the Park back when I was a family support worker later on in my career to my stay and play parents in a children's centre in central Bristol. I loved working with children. It's an incredibly joyous profession, and anyone who works with young children knows that. But the flip side is that, regrettably, it's incredibly poor pay. When I started off my career as an apprentice when I was 17 or 18 years old, I was on £2.50 an hour. It's quite hard to kind of be reasonable about that in retrospect, but the wages for educators at the moment are really dire, and particularly for those in apprenticeship positions. Often when I talk to my students, they tell me that if they want to get a good paid job, they're better off going into retail or the fast food industry. Not to say that those jobs are bad, but given what we know about the importance of early childhood, and also what we know about how much teachers and lecturers are paid, it's still a real shame that there's not bigger collective action against pay conditions for early years educators. That is coupled with poor career progression, incredibly long hours, particularly those working in private nursery settings where you're often expected to work 40-hour weeks, 8-hour days on the ground floor with children. Of course, we do it because we love it, but if we take a step back and reflect, it's an incredibly difficult role on both our physical and emotional well-being. There's often little union support and regrettably little sign of change. And reflecting of what we might do then, how we might respond to this sort of situation, I guess A, we could look away and pretend it's all rosy, or B, we could try and face these issues head on. And in doing so, the question there is, how do we do that without becoming overwhelmed? For me, what's really important to keep in mind when we think about how to improve workforce wellbeing is a pragmatic approach, to really consider our capacity to affect change at different levels. On the right-hand side there, I've just got a scale of concentric circles just to share with you the levels at which I believe we can affect change towards greater well-being. That's at a personal, an interpersonal and communal level, but also at a systemic and ecological level. Now, I know I've been a little bit critical of self-help and more individualistic approaches towards well-being at the start, but I do still think they have a place within our practice. Black feminist Audre Lorde famously said that caring for ourselves is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, and that in itself is an act of political warfare. For me, I think that's really important to hold on to. And my reflection for you now, as you're listening to me, is in what ways can you practice slowness and create time for self-care in your everyday lives? We live in an incredibly fast-paced society. It's the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Often we see that political events are lived in the time span of media events. They're here and they're gone, which often limits the extent to which we can have long-term conversations about particular issues. Slowness, of course, is not about doing everything at a snail's pace. It's not about speaking slowly or physically being slower, but really about rethinking the quality of our daily lives, really thinking about what opportunities we have to make time and space to reflect on our own practice and push back against the very fast-paced society that we have that inevitably leads to burnout and poor levels of well-being. At a communal and interpersonal level, I really liked what Valerie was saying about the culture of a setting earlier on. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at here. For me, there's real value in finding our microclimates of care and resistance. Who are those people that you can turn to within your personal and professional lives when things aren't going quite right, when you want to have a moan about certain things? Who are those people in similar situations to you that are like-minded and can be used as sources of solidarity against those broader conditions that we're facing? Ultimately, a lot of the research has shown that meeting and learning from others is really essential for maintaining well-being and overcoming fatigue when we continue with this sort of work with young children. And then at a broader systemic and ecological level, perhaps paradoxically and a little bit provocatively, maybe we need to stay unhappy to become happier. We do need to keep addressing these issues, even if they make others unhappy by raising them. Ultimately, I really do feel that there are no quick fixes in changing workforce wellbeing. The evidence we've had so far over the past 10, 15 years suggests that in a year's time, we're not necessarily going to see greater levels of well-being. There's no evidence to suggest that. So until things change, these conversations, these events about improving workforce well-being will continue to happen. So perhaps we just need to stay a little bit unhappy, push back a little bit more in order for us all to become happier in the long term. Ultimately then, my position is really that we absolutely need more well-being hampers, but we also need more collective action against those conditions that hamper us. It's not either or, it's all at once. And I really believe that if we effect change on those different scales, we can work more effectively towards greater workforce well-being. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the discussion afterwards.
Thanks, Shaddai, and for so sort of clearly managing to articulate really complex ideas and paradoxes and tensions between all those different layers of the onion, as you said. So really looking forward to unpacking some of that a bit later on. And now I'd like to welcome Lorna. So last but not least, Lorna Crossan.
Yeah, thanks. It's a real pleasure to be part of this discussion around wellbeing, workforce wellbeing, and I would like to share what's helped me in looking after my wellbeing and how I understand my wellbeing and keep on top of it, if you like. And I like to break it into 4 different areas. Mind, body, spirit, and environment. So, you know, in terms of those 4 areas, and actually, the way I see it, I think well-being is the most important thing that we need to address in terms of our needs, so that we can live happy, healthy lives. And by breaking into these 4 areas, I think it's easier to actually identify what we need to help us keep on top of our well-being, and it just helps. It always helps me to sort of, you know, take listening into myself and just ask myself periodically, what do I need, and then I'll think, is it something in my environment, something, you know, biological in my body? Is it something in terms of me thinking, or spiritually? So spiritually, you know, things like the sense of my own value and worth, the need to belong, to be loved, the need for a purpose, for sort of meaningful, uplifting relationships, honouring your heart and integrity. And then mind, you know, things like, in terms of what the mind needs, is things like positive affirmation, you know, positive self-talk. So is your mind your friend or not, you know? So, you know, things that can help with that is sort of meditation, still time, you know, personal prayer, maybe a set of non-negotiables and boundaries, forgiveness, gratitude, clear sort of vision and vision statement, and you know, a sort of need for you know, a clear strategy. And then in terms of environment, and actually I think it's worthwhile saying here that, you know, in looking at environment and body, and addressing these 4 areas, I think it's always good to start with the body and environment first, because that can then help propel, almost like a gale force wind, to help really propel your well-being spiritually and mentally. So in terms of environment, you know, creating a physical sanctuary where you feel safe, where, you know, aesthetically pleasing, nice fragrances, you feel safe and able to rest. Relationships, you know, are you in happy, healthy relationships that uplift you? And, you know, pollution, how do you manage pollution, you know, in terms of your environment? And then body, you know, our body, you know, I think it's about 90 nutrients per day. You know, is our body getting the right nutrients, the right amount of water, exercise, you know, strengthening and stretching, you know, and deep restorative sleep and any sort of pampering. And to help support that, you can put in non-negotiables, boundaries. So non-negotiable, for example, might be something like every Sunday is a rest and relaxation day. A boundary might be no calls after 8 p.m. and just remembering that we're not, we need to recharge our battery, you know, we need to keep charged. It's like our energy, and we need to notice by checking in what's charging my energy and what's actually depleting it, and just keep a check on that. You know, there might be specific things that you have to change in those 4 areas. And a great analogy that I like to think about for understanding, it's to imagine a table with 4 legs, and all are equal importance, all are equally need to be tended to and respected and need the right attention. But again, I think starting from the body and the environment is best to address first, to make any necessary changes in your environment biologically as well, because that can help propel forwards. And yeah, I'll just move on to the next slide. Okay. So yeah, I've just mentioned here about the table. You know, I think it's a good analogy here. You know, an equal need attention, and the table is like a self, you know, and to perform at our highest potential, if you like, we need to make sure that all are positioned correctly and given the correct respect and attention, so that it's balanced. Yeah, and again, talking about, just mention about water, you know, we lose 5 pints of water a day, you know, and it's like, so if your water intake throughout the day doesn't match what we're losing, then a state of water imbalance is created, which is an ideal breeding ground for so many health problems. So we need to make sure that we're replenishing that through the day, because our body is constantly trying to get remove of toxic waste, and you know, and it's like we get pollution that descends on us from everywhere, basically. So without this continuous flow of water running through our bodies, we can become like a stagnant pond, you know. So we really need to stop the stagnation by drinking 3-4 pints a day, you know, of water. It's really important. And again, these 4 areas, they're all interlinked, they're all synergistic, so they can all either positively or negatively affect the other, you know. So if we're not giving our bodies the right attention, it will affect the other pillars, the other legs of our table, you know, and vitamins and things like that. So yeah, and it's looking at those areas, the body, and saying, right, okay, am I getting all the nutrients? Am I drinking enough water throughout the day, so that I can have that sort of gale-forced wind in the right direction, and it's not propelling against you, which will really negatively affect the mind, and spiritually as well, can bring those other areas down. So I'll just move to the next slide. Now, this is, I really like this. This is by the Reach approach, and I quite like how this breaks it down. It's a really good illustration of the four areas, and it gives some examples. These are not by any means all the examples, and one, you know, we're all unique, so there might be one thing that works for another, but it's how we can positively affect those areas so that we stay very balanced, and our those 4 legs are all level and have all equally been tended to, you know, they all interface. Those 3 areas all the body, the mind, spiritually, all interfaces with the environment. So the environment here is, in this illustration, is shown as a green circle, and under each of these sort of 4 headings, again, we give listed some of our primary needs and how they can be maintained. And again, it's that checking in and listening in. Okay, what do I need here? How am I feeling? And just checking in with yourself throughout the day, and even just at the end of the day, you know, and looking at maybe your routine. you know, to keep you uplifted spiritually as well, and mentally. I've certainly done quite a lot of changes in my environment, and that's really helped me, as well as my body as well, in terms of my diet. That's really changed for the better, and I've really seen a big influence on my other areas by doing that. You know, having a sanctuary that's a genuine place of safety and retreat is so important. That's what I've found, you know. And because then if you don't, you know, what you might find is your mind and spirit will limp along in a really dysfunctional way. You know, if our environment doesn't give us that, and you know, also if an environment doesn't give us orderliness, you know, where there's some order to foster growth in the other areas, then you know, that can affect the mind as well. So yeah, so I'm just going to move to the next slide. Thank you, Paula. So I was just going to say about prioritizing our well-being, and if we don't, you know, what can happen. So, you know, it could manifest in different ways, you know, whether it be physical or psychological. You know, things like irritable bowel syndrome, tension, thyroid problems, headaches, you know, we can see it physically. And, you know, if we don't take those warning signals, if you like, and usually, you know, it's just some sort of dis-ease in yourself, then it can then sort of, you know, escalate into a manifestation physically or psychologically. So it's just keeping on top of it and prioritizing again. And it can also have that sort of ripple effect into other areas of our life, and feeling a sense of agency as well. We might end up feeling that we don't have that. And things like relationships as well can have a ripple effect in your work as well, especially if you're not happy in your workplace, or if you're not happy with in any sort of relationships. So yeah, there's different, you know, natures that it can manifest. And you know, if you turn well-being around, you've got being well. So am I being well? You know, and you know, we can become depleted and low in energy when our batteries run out of charge. And if we don't take notice of our needs and the warning signals that something has to change, these are the sort of things that it can lead to. So if we could just move on to the next slide, Paula. Thank you. Where are we? So again, I was saying earlier about checking in and just taking a moment. That's all it takes, just to ask yourself the question, what do I need? You know, what do I need right now? And, you know, looking at mind, body, spirit and environment, I think, okay, I'm feeling, how am I feeling in this moment? You know, when you're at home, is it the sanctuary that you want it to be? Okay, what do I need to change? That kind of thing. And just making a habit of just checking in with yourself and listening in, doing a little audit maybe of your well-being, looking at things again like non-negotiables, any sort of practices that you could do where you really feel that you're able to really recharge, and sort of uplifting things as well. So one of the main things that I do, and again, these sort of things really help nurture your being. So we're not human doings, we're human beings. So I find that these type of practices really help nurture the qualities that I have as a being. So peace, compassion, love, tolerance, forgiveness, courage. All these sort of practices for me help me really help me spiritually. Actually, it touches in all the areas again, that sort of synergistic effect of the four legs of the table. And yeah, vision boards, you know, your job, does it uplift you? Is it energy, you know, is it meaningful? Does it give you purpose and things like that? And if it doesn't, perhaps you could think, okay, you know, if you're in a job that you don't really like, well, how could I make it so that I feel uplifted and compassionate? There might be things that you can do. And also hobbies that really make you feel alive and really make you think, yeah, I can't wait to do this kind of thing. And it, you know, and it's different for everyone. And taking the time out to prioritize those hobbies. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, Paula. So, you know, our thoughts and how we think about ourselves in the world affect our feelings, and feelings then transfer into our behaviours. So again, looking at those and sort of maybe even thinking of, you know, have we taken any baggage on from what we were told as children? You know, can we challenge that? Is that my belief, or a generational thing that I've sort of been given and it doesn't belong to me, kind of thing? You know, taking the time to challenge that and sort of transforming it, if you like. And one of the things that I really enjoy that help me address my needs and affect all the 4 legs of my table is yin yoga, and it really nurtures and helps me. And again, it's good to have a think of you know, these type of things, and maybe ask the question throughout the day: how are you being? You know, are you feeling calm, relaxed? Are you happy? Are you being present? And if not, why not? And what do I need to nurture that, and keep me balanced and happy? So next slide, I'm going to talk a bit about yin yoga. So these are just some of the positions in yin yoga. Now, yin yoga is a style of yoga that involves holding passive poses for longer periods of time. So it's more of a being yoga, feminine yoga, and we hold them usually between 3 and 10 minutes. It's a little slow paced, meditative than any other styles of yoga, and it really helps stimulate the connective tissue and subtle energy channels in the body. Getting into these type of positions, it really sets up the right conditions for the body to just let go. It's almost like it sends a signal to the body that you're safe and you're able, and it really helps activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And it kind of, they've actually done some studies, and it's been shown that yin yoga practices it really decreases the size of the amygdala, you know, our fight or flight response. And it's a really, during yin yoga, you get into a more receptive state where the mind is more open to positive suggestion. So it's a really good time to also listen to any sort of affirmations that perhaps you like to listen to, or any sort of guided commentary meditations. And it's a really positive vehicle for healing and empowerment. As I said, the subconscious is much more open and much more accepting in that sort of deep relaxing state. And if you want to try any of these, you know, get a whole load of props, and yeah. And also, yes, it's derived. It's not from China. It was derived from classical hatha yoga, and as I said before, it's more of a being yoga. So it's balancing the yin, the feminine, and the yang. So if you feel that you're always rushing around, then maybe look at how you can balance that. We're doing more sort of yin type creative things: singing, dancing, drawing, painting. You know, yin yoga. And some of the other benefits of practicing yin yoga are lubrication and protection of the joints, deeper access to the body through relaxation of the muscles. It regulates the energy in the body. It's calming and balancing for the mind. And it stresses reduction in the ability to release anxiety. Now I'm going to move on now, and these are just some more of the poses. And if I can quickly say, I'll just show you these. I've done these a while ago. I've broken down some ideas for myself of little things that I just sort of take a minute, just check how I'm doing. And I've got a card for 1 minute. So I've put out things like drink glass of water, put on hand cream, give myself a hug, take a long deep breath, do a lovely stretch, say an affirmation, meditate. So that's 1 minute things. And I've got a 5 minute one of list of things. I've got 15 minutes and I've got half a day. So I'll stop rabbiting on then. Thank you, and look forward to the Q&A now. Thank you. I'll hand over to you, Claudia. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lorna. And I think you've done a really great job of bringing some of the discussions full circle, actually, because you've kind of given some really practical ideas about some of the concepts brought up earlier from some of our other speakers, like thinking about safety in terms of the environment was something that Valerie brought up in the context of safety, sort of safe spaces in the setting. And so really want to say thank you to all our speakers and invite everyone to come on screen now so we can have a discussion and respond to some of the questions that we've had from the audience. Also, Lorna, I just wanted to mention, when we were preparing for this webinar, you mentioned something about, from your perspective as a parent participation advisor as well, about why this feels so important for you as a parent to kind of think about this topic when you're thinking about your children. And I just wondered if you wanted to say anything briefly on that before we move into some other discussion.
Yeah, sure. I think, by prioritizing, practitioners prioritizing their well-being, it would really help me as a parent feel really reassured that they're sort of taking that ownership and really looking after themselves, because then they'll be able to sort of, if their cup's full, you can't fill from an empty cup, then they'll be able to be there and to be able to give the children what they need, and also to help them with to co-regulate. So yeah, it would just reassure me as a parent that the staff, the practitioners, are really prioritising their well-being and looking after themselves. Thanks for mentioning that, Claudia.
All right, thanks, Lorna. So we've had loads of questions, and I guess one sort of theme that's run through everyone's presentations is that sort of balance between the individual and the environmental. And we've had a few questions around policy as well, and that kind of tension between some of the different priorities and school readiness and some of the on-the-ground tensions that there are as well. So I wanted to start there and just ask the panel maybe to give a bit more context to why things like school readiness is a debate in the first place, because I think to some people they might think, oh, making children ready for school seems like a really logical thing. So I wondered if you might want to just explore and explain to some of the audience why there is that tension to begin with. Valerie, I can see you come off mute.
I like the idea that everybody keeps speaking about making children ready for school, but they don't seem to think about making schools ready for children. And that is where your environment becomes really important. So the children are the focal point, but your school environment needs to be ready for children, for you to have that balance of well-being. So that's just my little contribution to that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Valerie. I think that's a really good point, actually. I think we have to remember that in the UK, we have one of the earliest school starting ages in Europe. And that, for me, is really important to bear in mind. For me, I'm quite critical of school readiness, given what we know about the research on play and how important that is. And actually, when you look at the research, all of it says that you play for longer. In the long term, you develop in a much better and more holistic way. So this push on certain skills, such as literacy or numeracy from an early age, it creates more pressure onto the child. And actually that time could be best spent in play, engaging in the environment, in the natural world, in all sorts of different ways. What we see is these broader pressures that are pushed down on the government, which is ultimately linked to later workforce agendas. We want to get children ready from an early age to be ready to go out into the workforce in later society. But we know that if they play for longer, they will be even better in later society. So it's really a misunderstanding of the literature and the research that shows the value of play. Certainly when we look at the Nordic countries and where they do play until 6 or 7 years old, and there's much more of a focus on that, their outcomes in the long term are a lot better. So I am critical of the school readiness agenda, because It puts a lot of undue pressure on children to meet particular aspects of literacy and numeracy at an age when they're not really ready for it and they should be playing for longer.
Thanks, Shaddai. And I guess that pressure for children as well is perhaps being transferred, or is what staff are feeling as well. And a couple of you mentioned burnout, and I don't know, Wanying, if you mentioned some international literature as well, and sort of the context from international research too. And I wondered if there any of that pressure you've kind of seen, any patterns in burnout and well-being that I guess we could think about in our in this English context as well.
I think like one thing that I want to bring it up is just like one recent study that we conducted among like workforce, and it's like an online big international survey. And one thing relating to well-being is really interesting. When people think about what is most important to their work well-being, they would say that it's their salary, it's their compensation. But when we run analysis, it turned out actually the most important thing that drives well-being is sense of belonging. So I think Anna Floyd Center here like did a really good job like creating this platform, like making this space for everyone to communicate. I don't know if that answers your questions, but it's just like one way to think about how we can deal with burnout, or like for the bigger community, like what we can offer for school.
Oh, that's really helpful, and it reminds me, going back to Valerie's presentation, of some of the sort of little things you talked about, some things that are achievable in earlier settings, and I think that was really helpful for our audience to hear, Valerie, and some of your examples I think spoke to a sense of belonging as well as kind of you mentioning some of the more structural things that can enhance or obscure well-being as well. You're on mute.
I noticed that someone is saying, well, when you have a 40-hour shift, how do you make this practical within your setting? And I think what we've done is we've become ensconced and embedded in a certain way of working, and we can't perceive how to get out of that. And I think one of the most practical things you can do is sit and have a conversation and link it to what Lorna was saying about what do I need? What is it that we need in this moment? How can we make that happen for everybody so that we embed a culture of well-being rather than try to impose well-being onto a setting? So you have to come at it at a different angle, speak to staff about what is it that could make the day better for everyone? How can we achieve it? Where are these solutions? Because if we separate staff from those discussions, what we end up doing is imposing what we perceive to be well-being on them, which may not be what they need for being well, according to Lorna.
And hopefully we had a question saying, when you were doing 40-hour weeks, when staff are also parents as well, and they have lots of stuff going on, how can they implement lots of these ideas in practice? But I think from the advice that you guys have given today, there's kind of small little steps that can be done, as well as thinking about some of the collective action as well, Shaddai, that you've been talking about, and some of the very practical tips, Lorna, that you mentioned as well. So I think some of the questions and the comments also reflect a sort of, there's so much that could be done. And I wonder from maybe your professional experiences yourself, if there was sort of takeaways that have been really meaningful for you, something that's helped you take into account the complexities, but also if you could sort of summarize one thing that's been meaningful for you in your career in terms of your well-being.
I didn't want to be the person that keeps jumping into the gap, but I think one of the things that I've had to look at in terms of my own well-being is how I challenge myself to not just do what people expect me to do, and to also not be proving to others that I am doing this job that I'm supposed to be doing. You know, I speak about, you know, you're on the computer at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, what are you proving and who are you proving it to? Because the message you're giving to other people, I appear to be successful. The message is success is ensconced in doing more work. But actually, we're needing work-life balance for us to be healthy and to have healthy minds and healthy bodies. My body has suffered immensely because of just sitting and working. It is productive for my output, but it hasn't been productive for my own health. So it's just a warning for everyone that, you know, pace yourselves and do your thing as best as you can to support your own physical needs as well as, you know, your mental needs.
Thanks, Valerie. Lorna, you've got your hand up.
So yeah, just slowing the pace and taking regular pauses. You know, just a pause for thought even, and just reflection. And things like, you know, with not the, you know, in terms of comparison, you know, we almost in school work, it's almost like they trying to turn us all into robots. And actually we're not a robot. Life's a tapestry, and we've got to honour that tapestry and really show up, you know, and by showing up, adhering to your needs. And because I think it's exhausting trying to be someone that you're not. That can really deplete your energy. So being your authentic self and really showing up and honouring that, because by doing that, we could all be walking permission slips. It's a sigh of relief when I see someone who is just being themselves. It's just like, you know. And then in terms of the work environment, I quite like it if there's like a jar of little affirmations or something. So they've got to take one a day as they come in and read it out. And sharing positive things, you know, celebrating positive moments, having those positive times in the workplace where we're sharing people's successes, whether in the work or outside the workplace. Yeah, and in terms of comparison, I was just going to say, the only thing really, we can't compare ourselves with other people because we are all unique. You can't compare, it's impossible. But I think what you can't compare against is your potential. You know, you can compare it against where you're now and your potential, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, Lorna. And Wanying, I can see you have your hand up, but also it would be useful maybe to come back to some of the idea of practicing slowness, Shaddai, as well, because that sort of reflects a little bit what Valerie and Wanying have been talking about, and that was a really interesting point you made. But Wanying, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just want to say that even though we're talking about work well-being, but we're a human first, then worker. So it is like important to see like as an individual, like what's important to you rather than at the workplace what is important. In terms of for me, I think what I learned from mindfulness, I think there's three conceptions are really useful for me. I think maybe Claudia, you're also familiar with this concept as well.
Shaddai, did you want to come in around practicing slowness?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to reflect on, back on my career as an earliest practitioner and what my managers did to enhance my well-being. I guess what I will say is that it's all well and good having some more fruit bowls in the staff room, but if staff are then going home with no food in the cupboards, then it's tokenistic. We need to really bear that in mind in terms of that broader structural issue that can be infringing on greater well-being. What settings can do is really put their money where their mouth is. And certainly for me, I was really well supported in pursuing my career development. So I had an amazing manager who allowed me to go 1 day a week to university and do my undergraduate degree. They funded that time away from the setting and made sure that I was adequately paid to be able to do that. without that and without the support of that manager, I wouldn't be where I was today. But because she was able to give me that time and space to pursue something that I knew would be better for me, for my own well-being, my development, felt really, really important. So, I do think that the small things are important, but there are also those broader structural issues that we need to be mindful of as well.
Thanks for sharing that, because I think that's such a lovely example of how the kind of setting, one of the layers in the ecological onion can really have an input on an individual, and by proxy to children and families. We did also have some questions about childminders as well, and I'm interested to hear what the panel thinks about wellbeing for childminders, where there isn't necessarily that support structure, there isn't that obvious building management structure, and I wondered if there was some advice for how childminders, when they're doing more lone working, can look after themselves and enhance their own wellbeing.
I think on your own you can think of what's good antidotes. So if there's a time that they're feeling fear or anxiety, what's the antidote to that, and how could you almost administer that for yourself? But sometimes when you're, I know sometimes if my my teenager is I'm finding it challenging with them, it's like quite often I just have to do something physically, so go out for a walk or whatever, to help the body just calm down, and take rain or a big breath or something. And I think as well, just sort of doing those, thinking of 5-minute and 1-minute activities that you could do for yourself, for your well-being while you're being a childminder. What could I do for 5 minutes while little one's having a nap or whatever? Just saying what you could do in those 5 minutes to sort of keep you charged, taking that agency of the self, if you like, feeling empowered. Yeah.
Thanks, Lorna. Valerie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was thinking as well that it isn't any fun to feel alone within a system. So I think it is a very healthy exercise to network and find some people who are in the same situation as yourself, that you can actually call out to them, reach out for support, advice, because all of us need that. Being there on your own is not a good thing. You have to have the capacity to speak to somebody, and sometimes in the moment, because you need to offload. When you're there, you are the only person that's with a child. And if you are in that turbulent state of emotions, a reaction can be the wrong thing to do. So just having somebody to reach out to, I think, is a healthy pursuit for somebody like a childminder.
Yeah, and that's just reminding me of how you started, actually, Valerie, talking about emotions, and then I think you said something around them being neutral inherently, but then they can sort of become meaningful in different ways, and to be able to nurture them and not kind of get the boundaries right between not pushing the emotions away but working with them. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, this is the concept is that basically our emotions are neutral. They're just a wave of sensation, as I call it. It's the physiological reaction to that is what creates either the actions that we do, whether we feel anxiety, how far it goes, and all of that. So we have to be mindful of ourselves, especially when we're dealing with children, because not only it's not only what we say to children that has an impact, it's even the things we don't say. Our actions sometimes speak louder than words. So that mindfulness allows us to understand the impact we have on other children. Also, it's that checking in. How is it that I'm actually feeling here? I mean, we don't know. There's some children who are really annoying because they're either crying all the time and you have no idea why they're crying, and it's really frustrating and it's getting on top. And if you don't have something to go, it can just build and build and build till it becomes something that you're sorry you didn't deal with. So for me, it is really important to be real within, you know, what we do, because pretending that everything is all flowers and it's all wonderful when we're working with children, it is not a real situation. It can be quite frustrating and trying. So, and especially, you know, Shaddai made the point that what you get paid, sometimes there's so many people in early years that go, I could get better pay for sitting in Tesco. Why would I put myself through this? So it's not that you shouldn't have, you need to have that passion for the role you have, but what comes out of it, because it's a really important role, needs to sustain you as well. Because, you know, I can't take passion to the supermarket. I can sit in there and work and make more money, but, you know, passion won't help me at that point.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think Lorna also mentioned about values as well. And, you know, being able to be in a job which aligns with your values is really important. But obviously that can be undermined by some of the conditions that people are working within. And you also mentioned, Valerie, mindfulness, and that's quite a perfect segue back to Wanying, because I think you were talking about mindfulness when the internet dropped off. Would you like to come back in there, because we missed the end of what you were saying?
Yeah, I was just mentioning the same thing. Being non-judgmental to your negative emotion, it's really helpful. It helps you to like jump out the circle of blaming yourself. Yeah, and the other thing relating to work as a childminder, I guess Shaddai's ecological system might be helpful. I mean, it's already really good that this person has the motivation to change things. And I wish you have someone in your inner circle from your close relationship that can support you. But it's good that you have motivation to reach out to the like outer circle to reach out different resources and support. And a food center like this platform, again, it's a really good platform.
Thank you. Okay, well, we've just got we have a couple more minutes left. So I wondered if each panel member just wanted to say any final words before we close for the day.
Can I just say, Claudia, with my youngest son, he's 7 now, but you know, even previous to that, whenever I'm doing things with him, it's not in terms of the quantity, but it's the quality. So we could be doing something really basic, you know, out shopping and stuff, but actually it's how I'm being will dictate the experience. And, you know, he's really receptive to how I am. And they're like sponges, you know, they take in how you're feeling and things like that. And I think we underestimate how much they're like sponges. And I think Valerie touched on it about, you know, they don't necessarily learn from what you tell them, but they learn by example. So I would say quality over quantity, you know, it's a quality in what we're doing. So it's not like rushing about and trying to do all these activities and keeping them amused. No, it's for me anyway, it's the quality of that interaction. And the values and how you're being in that interaction will really be calming for the child and really nurturing as well.
Thanks, Lorna.
My final bit, I'll speak a bit about what is challenging me at the moment, which is the Israeli-Palestine conflict and how it affects my staff. And one of the things I got up saying today is not speaking about something doesn't mean that it is still not having an impact. If I have cancer and I don't talk about it, I still have cancer. If I have cancer and I don't treat it, I still have cancer. So ignoring something that is hugely impacting on my staff well-being, because it's asking them to separate their faith, their beliefs, their everything, and to just pretend that this huge, great, big thing that's happening is not happening, is really challenging me to go, where do I stand? So I've had to fall back on safe spaces and to make sure that I do not just ignore something because of my fear my feeling I may offend, you know, but also just to create a space that people can speak and they can hear each other's perspectives for overall well-being. So.
Thanks, Valerie, for bringing that in. And I guess it speaks again to the ecological model and how different managers, how different staff members are taking into account what's happening globally as well, not just in kind of a policy way that we've been speaking today as well. Shaddai, would you like to say a final few words?
Yeah, I guess my kind of takeaways for the audience, if you can do kind of 2 actions from this webinar, it would be to go and talk to someone about what you've heard today and talk about well-being and broach that conversation, begin to develop that network and those people around you for which you can have those conversations about workforce well-being. And secondly, just do something for yourself. Make sure you do make that time to practice good well-being. If that's, you know, one concrete action you can do, then certainly make sure you do that as you go away from this webinar today.
Thanks, Shaddai. And Wanying, final comments from you.
Yeah, just really short. I think just for individual value your voice, and for the whole community or the school or whatever setting value workers' voice as well.
Thank you. And thanks so much for all of you for giving up your time today. It's been so helpful. And as I've said before, kind of we've gone from the macro right down to the day-to-day practical. I know it's been really useful. I can tell it's been useful for our audience from the comments. And we'll be sending out a feedback form afterwards to participants. So if you're able to fill that in, that would be really helpful. And I just wanted to show some appreciation for everyone sharing something personal as well as professional, because I think that really helps and speaks to the relational approach that we use at Anna Freud. So thank you again. And yeah, we'll let people know about our next Early Years in Mind webinar in due course. Have a good evening.